Let me bring in Sherwin as we really just bring you some context here as to this particular briefing at such a critical time. And Sherwin, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. So one could even be walking in and wondering, why is the UN Secretary General talking about such an important matter, right now? What exactly is the context and what has been going on around him to bring us to this point where he's sounding the alarm?
Yeah, and essentially, Bongiwe, it's well framed, that question, because why are we talking about El Nino in the same breath as we're talking about the conflict in the Middle East, particularly the war between the United States and Iran? And he's putting these two emergencies on the same level, on the same pedestal, because the existential nature of the threat is not confined to the war in Iran. It's not confined to the Strait of Hormuz. It's happening in the Central and Eastern Pacific, that body of water between Australia and South America, right? If you go around the corner on the maps we have in our classroom, certainly the ones we grew up with in South African schools, and the Secretary General says the world is facing two major crises, the one in the Gulf, the ongoing conflict in the Gulf. He talks about how it is disrupting supply chains, increasing the price of fertilizer, increasing the price of fuel, the price of energy. Costs are going up and it's becoming, extremely disruptive around the world. Add to that the impending threat that El Nino is bringing to various parts of the world, most notably what we are seeing happening, the skyrocketing temperatures in Europe, the bushfires that we've seen in countries like Spain and France. In Canada recently, bushfires, forest fires were sweeping down the smog, the smoke to places in the northern parts of the United States, including here in New York. So the existential threat of El Nino is very, very much something that countries need to be grappling with, as much as South Africa might be at the end of their winter season. I was talking to my mom yesterday. She said, I'm cold. I said, Mom, that's about to change, right? The temperatures are going to go up. You know what happens in places like Table Mountain, Cape Town. And what he is saying here is that governments, local municipalities, national governments need to be prepared for the heat that is coming, the disruption that will come from that, the disasters that will come from that, the increased energy consumption, right? Air conditioning that will come from that, food prices that are going to go up, droughts might increase, which adds another layer to rising fertilizer costs and rising food costs. So we are in an existential moment here, and that's why you are talking about climate in one breath, but also the geopolitical concerns, the bombs, the weapons, right? The military-industrial complex that is dominating our conversations in terms of geopolitics today. These are both on an equal footing, and it's going to take multilateralism in a sense, people working together really to arrest these problems moving forward.
And Sherwin, as you speak about just that particular point of putting them right on the same level. He even goes as far as saying that, heat, extreme heat has long been a silent killer. Even going as far as, doing something that we often do when we talk about the wars, which is to say that there are people behind these numbers that we are reporting. And here again, he says there are people behind the numbers.
Yeah, let's just go through in summary what he said in terms of those numbers, right? The World Food Program, in terms of the war in Iran, has estimated that 45 million people could face acute food insecurity because of this conflict right about now, right? This started almost 6 months ago. It was supposed to last 4 to 5 weeks. The acute economic emergency that this conflict is bringing in terms of costs for families, for individuals, for people in countries around the world is being felt already and is likely to be sustained moving forward if those elevated Brent crude oil prices, as we talked about yesterday, remain elevated at close to $100 a barrel. Add to that the climate emergency. He talks about the World Meteorological Organization saying that the worst is still to come. An overheated planet is getting even hotter. El Nino is inside the house and turning up the heat. August through October is expected to bring above normal temperatures across almost the entire planet. He warns of more extreme weather, including droughts, heat waves, and poor rainfall in parts of India, Africa, Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. So no one escapes this. No one escapes this. This is a serious emergency. And he says, get prepared. Governments, everybody, the private sector, call your neighbors, get prepared. The heat is coming, and what the impacts are going to be is going to be an emergency that we cannot always predict. And so the warning bells are sounding right here from New York.
And sounding indeed, Sherwin. And he ends off there by saying that the UN needs to be a bit more active when it comes to addressing this particular situation, because it seems that some of the countries, right, where there appears to be a deliberate campaign, he says, by, the fossil fuel industry when it comes to curtailing, and I'm even paraphrasing here, some of what we can talk about, some of what we are seeing as well.
There's a concept in the climate negotiations, Bongabe. I'm sure you've heard it. I've heard it many times. It's called common but differentiated responsibilities. Countries that have the greatest responsibility for the impacts of climate change that we are all feeling today. It's not your small island states. It's not your small African countries. But they are often the countries that are most vulnerable, right? Because they don't have the infrastructure and the resilience. And so countries like the United States, that historically has been the largest emitter of CO2 into the atmosphere, that is creating the impacts that we are feeling in terms of a heating planet today, ice caps that are melting. The president of that country today says that climate change is a hoax. His catchphrase in terms of his election messaging was drill, baby, drill. They're expanding fossil fuel exploration and consumption in the United States. The United States today is the largest producer of oil, which is central to energy needs, certainly in many parts of the world, larger than Saudi Arabia. So understand the dynamics. When you talk about what the United Nations has to do, the United Nations is as strong as the complementarity of all its parts. That working together, when the engine works together of all 193 member states, when they move in unison, that's when you achieve the most. But when you have powerful countries that are creating obstacles to broad consensus, that those divisions really hurt the broader project. Think about a pandemic, the response to COVID-19. It was that coming together that got vaccines and ventilators to where it was needed around the world the most. And so that collaboration is key here. But in the absence of that, where do we go, right? I think it's going to be regional blocks, the AU working with SADC and trying to find consensus where you can.
And it's going to be an interesting conversation to take forward, Sherwin, because even as he speaks about early warning systems and everything else, that's what we always talk about as far as the adverse weather conditions are concerned. But thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. That's SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease live for us in New York. And that was a wrap there of the UN Secretary General's remarks earlier on.